It's time for your Heli Life giveaway secret word. Listen up and remember this word because you'll need it to enter for a chance to win exclusive Heli Life gear. Ready? This episode's secret word is mast. Visit contests.verticalhelicasts.com to enter the secret word.
Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Halsey Scheider with the Helicopter Podcast, and I am coming at you again with another awesome episode. I love doing this. I love being able to sit down, talk about helicopters. These last few episodes, we're talking about safety. Recently, I had Chris Young on. We were talking about the TOPS program, which is, safety in regards to the tour operators and keeping them accountable. We also recently had Tyson Phillips on, and we were talking about spatial disorientation, inadvertent entry into IMC, all those fun things. Again, emphasis on safety. And I love being able to use this platform to talk about safety. And those two particular guests were actually introductions with my guest now. Terry Palmer was like, hey, if you want to talk to some cool people, talk to these people. So Terry, welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. And thank you so much for providing some of our recent discussions that we've had. I've had some great conversations.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be on here with you and to talk about something that I'm passionate about. And you might say that my name might be Terry, but my middle name is Training. So all I like to talk about is the helicopter training and safety and how we got where we are and where we're going from here.
Well, perfect. I can't wait to dive deep and learn about your background and how you got so involved in the training and kind of that whole career path and what you're still doing for the industry. But before we dive in, of course, a big shout out and special thanks to MHM Publishing for making the Vertical HeliCASTS platform possible. We wouldn't be able to have these conversations without your support and your introductions. MHM was actually Oliver from MHM, the editor of Vertical Magazine, our boy Ollie, who won't come on the podcast for whatever reason. Thank you, Oliver. Recommended that I reach out to Terry. And so through those relationships, I just get to have these awesome conversations. So Terry, why don't you spin us up on who you are and how you ended up dubbing your middle name as Training?
Well, my first career, believe it or not, was not in aviation. My first career was building robots and special effects, and ended up doing some work for Disney and Universal Studios and things like that. But I always wanted to learn how to fly. And one of my hobbies as a teenager and young adult was flying radio control aircraft. But I always wanted to fly real aircraft. So it got to the point where I decided I was going to go take flight lessons. And I took flight lessons in Mesquite, Texas. That's where I was living, was in Mesquite, Texas. And trying to find a good flight school was a huge problem, huge problem. So, I didn't do any due diligence. I didn't check things out. All I knew is I wanted to fly. I thought it was a dream. I want to go fly. And so I had no idea what a safe airplane looked like, what a good instructor was. I had no idea.
Sure.
And so when I finally found an airplane, and I started in airplanes, finally found an airplane, and I was learning how to fly, and I was so happy to be in the air, a little nervous, so happy to be in the air. And I'm coming into land, and my landings were great. And all of a sudden they switched aircraft. The aircraft was out of service. So they brought me a new aircraft, and it was still 30 years old, but they brought me another aircraft, and I got in the aircraft and I couldn't land at all. And the instructor said, "What is wrong with you? You had great landings." And I said, well, yeah, but that rusted out hole in the floor, I could see where the runway was. Now I can't. So I didn't know
That's
what
funny.
I didn't know.
Yeah, of
And
course.
so I started thinking about this and saying, I didn't know these things. And I didn't read up on it. I was going through ground school and all that. And I'm started to think, what are other students doing? What do they not know? What do they not know about safety? So I'm going to do some research on safety. And I started doing that. And I had a sad thing happen. My husband passed away. And so the robot industry changed for me. And I decided, I don't know what I want to do with my future. And my instructor said, well, you can't find a good flight school, so why don't you open one? So again, I didn't do any due diligence. I just said, okay.
Sure.
And I opened a flight school. And I did that for 10 years. And I realized that I had a passion for teaching. I had a passion for making sure that the students knew what they were doing and that they had the right tools and resources to be successful. And there were a few that I suggested they just go play golf, But for the most part, I realized that was important. So because I did no due diligence, I only lasted 10 years in that business because I totally ran out of money.
I mean, 10 years is a long time. I give anyone kudos.
I managed to do it.
I tell anyone if they can sustain business for 3 years, then that is something to and pay yourself. That's something of an achievement. So I would say 10 years. That's big success.
But then I had to get a job. And I actually went to work for Omni-Flight Helicopters, which at the time was an air medical operator. But I hadn't flown helicopters. I'd just flown fixed wing. And they brought me into the training department because I found a talent for building courseware and writing things and teaching. So I got into the training department and I started doing some research on the safety side to look for what resources were needed in this industry. And I realized that the accident rate was so high back then in the air medical industry. And I started looking for ways to improve that. And I developed some pretty heavy duty CRM type courses on the first AMRAM, Air Medical Resource Management course, and things like that to go out and teach at the bases to include the whole team, trying to build on that safety. And at the same time, Omni-Flight was kind enough to send me to Bell for training in an L4. So that's, going to Bell was exciting, so I got to do that. And then I still wanted to concentrate on the safety and training. Accident rate was not getting any better in the industry, just maybe a little bit. And one of the FAA inspectors came to me and said, Terry, you know where you belong? You belong at Flight Safety International. And I said, okay, maybe I can make a difference there. So I went to Flight Safety, but they immediately took me out of helicopters and put me back in fixed wing. And so for 4 years, I taught Falcon jets. And again, I got there and I said, Falcon? What's a Falcon? Where do you start? Well, the best thing you can do is research the aircraft that you're going to be flying.
Of course.
And totally spend time on it. And when you build a course, you learn an awful lot about systems.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to do that. It took me about 1.5 years to get comfortable in that aircraft. And then I could teach it. And flight safety was great in letting me do all of the courses like CRM and approach and landing accident reduction and things like that I developed. And at the same time, learn the Falcon 10. So I taught that for a while, but my heart was still in helicopters and the helicopter safety. So I went to flight safety and I said, how can we be more involved with helicopters? Right now, they had a few simulators for the larger Bells and they had the Sikorsky, and that's it. Well, what about everybody else? And flight safety told me that there wasn't a big market on the helicopters and that they really couldn't see putting any money into it. And I started doing some research and realized flight safety's business didn't come from the FAA. It didn't come from regulation. It came from the insurance companies requiring pilots to train in simulators. So I went to the insurance underwriters and I said, why don't you recommend simulator training for turbine helicopter operators like you do fixed wing? And they said, because there aren't any. There aren't any simulators. So I went back to flight safety and I said, if you put the simulators in, the insurance companies are going to recommend it. And they said, well, we need to think about it. Why don't you host a customer meeting and see if, people are interested? So I said, okay. And they said, come back to us with 20 customers in 6 weeks. So I started cold calling all the operators I could think of. And I got flight safety to agree to host a meeting. And 90 people showed up.
Wow.
Including the FAA, including several of the manufacturers. It was Eurocopter, Bell. They all showed up at this meeting. HAI showed up at the meeting. It was really interesting. And at the end of the meeting, the vice president from flight safety got up and said, okay, how many of you want to train in a simulator? And all hands went up. So he came back to me and he said, what do you want? And I said, well, I'd like to start a new program of basic helicopters at flight safety, and I'd like to run it. And he said, you got it. So I ended up starting the helicopter department I was handling going to every safety meeting I could think of, no matter what sector of the industry, go to all the safety meetings, go to all the training meetings, and see what was going on in the industry. And this is when I realized something very interesting. Most sectors didn't talk to others. Okay. So I went to the oil offshore meetings and I found out they really had their act together. First of all, that most of them trained in simulators if they could. And then they were, they had all these safety committees and all these safety things going on. And I said, wow, if air medical only knew this, why don't they know this? And that's when I found out that the sectors don't talk to each other. So I started going to all the different sectors, including the tour operators and law enforcement and air medical. And I put it all together and I would go from one meeting to another and say, well, you know what would solve that problem? The offshore guys just figured it out. And then I would go to law enforcement and say, hey, look what they're doing at air medical. And I just started doing that at the same time, pushing flight safety to build more simulators. And so flight safety started looking at more Bells. And of course, they had the Sikorsky, but they weren't looking at Eurocopter. And they said, we have to work with the manufacturer. If the manufacturer won't work with us, we can't build the sim. And I would go to Eurocopter and we would go back and forth. And, it was like an ongoing meeting that never was going to end. Okay. So then I went back to flight safety and I said, why do you have to go to the manufacturer? And they said, well, that's how we do it. I said, well, you have a competitor in this business and the manufacturer only deals with one person. So how is your competitor doing it if they're not going to the manufacturer? And they said, well, as long as we have the data, we can build it. And I said, well, that's a different story. Why can't we work with an operator and get the data from the operator? And they said, well, we've never done that. And you won't find an operator willing to do it. And that's when I called Metro Aviation. Because I knew they loved.
I have to pause you for 1 sec, Terry. First off, for some context, what year is this about? Like when you're going to flight safety and you're saying, hey, we need to do simulators. Like what year was that big meeting where those 90 people showed up?
2005.
2005. So 20 years ago. That's crazy to think that 20 years ago, there wasn't what we know of today as flight safety and all the training and simulation that goes on. So you're really like, you're the original reason And the person that built the helicopter flight safety department, I mean, that's incredible.
Well, flight safety did have the Sikorsky, and they
Yeah,
did
that
have
is
the big bells,
Sikorsky. Yeah.
but that's it. They didn't have anything else. And so, yes, I pushed and pushed and pushed and tried to find a way. And what got people interested was the fact that I got the insurance companies on board. And then I did something a little different with the NTSB. I kept looking at the accident reports, and every time the NTSB went in and did a report, they would come back and recommend more equipment on board the aircraft every single time. It needs something like a TCAS, or they just always had something they wanted to add to it. And it was very, very expensive, and the operators couldn't always do it. And then the FAA didn't pay any attention anyway. So I went to the NTSB. I found out that one of the NTSB board members was going to be in Dallas. I was in Dallas at the time at Flight Safety, and he was going to be visiting the Flight Safety Center. And I said to our center manager, "Can I meet with him?" And he said, "Sure." So I got the conference room, and the NTSB board member comes in, and he's very polite, very nice. And I said, "Look, I got a question for you. Why is it that you guys always recommend new equipment when you're looking at an accident, and you never talk about training?" And he said, "Well, why would we talk about training? Everybody trains." And I was like, "Whoa, you don't know." So he said, "Look," he said, "even if we recommended training, even if we did that, everything that we recommend has to go to the FAA. If they don't implement it, it's useless." And I said, "You're wrong." I said, "If you recommend training and we go to the insurance companies and say, 'Hey, the NTSB just recommended training,' I guarantee you the insurance companies are going to say, 'Okay, we're going to look at training.'" And he just looked at me and he goes, "You have a point." So they asked me to host another meeting at Flight Safety, and this time to talk about how can we get people into simulators? What simulators can we possibly build? How can we build them? And who's going to help the customer realize this is what they need? So I invited the NTSB and I invited the insurance companies. And it was a little difficult getting the insurance companies there because they all didn't want to be in the same room at the same time with their competitors.
That's funny.
It was quite a challenge. But they told me as long as I had an attorney in there that would be keep them all from talking money, that it would be okay.
That's funny.
So I got an attorney to agree to do it. And he said, "Well, I'm not really that kind of attorney." I said, "It doesn't matter. They didn't say. They just said they needed an attorney. So when I go around the room, just stand up and say I'm the attorney."
Loophole.
So anyway.
You crack me up. I feel like, how do people describe you? Was tenacious a word that's been you? I mean, it seems like you find something and man, you go at 100%.
Yeah, but it takes me a while sometimes. I mean, I've been doing this for 35 years,
I just love that though. It's like this whole story that you're telling, which I love, by the way, and it's fun to just hear this. The one thing that I keep, the common theme so far is like, you identify a problem and then you do something about it. And I don't think that that's actually a common characteristic for a lot of people. A lot of people may recognize a problem and then they just move on, right? They don't really do anything to either make the situation better or fix it, or they say, "Oh, that's not my pay grade. I'm teaching the Falcon 10. I'm just going to focus on that." A lot of people don't have this this external drive to kind of ask deeper questions, push a little bit harder. And so, yeah, I'm just really impressed. It's just neat to hear, like, you run into a little bit of a roadblock, you ask a question, you don't get the answer you want, you ask more questions, you put together these meetings, you get all these people together. It's like you're an entrepreneur of safety. It's like you have this drive to succeed on that level, which is just really cool. So Just a tangent there for a sec. I like that.
Thank you to our sponsor, Vertical Aviation International. This March, you need to be at Verticon, the largest vertical aviation trade show and conference in the world. With over 15,000 attendees and all the major OEMs and suppliers, it's the place to be. Register today and save. Early bird prices end January 16th. Go to verticon.org.
I want my tombstone to say she made a difference. That's all I want.
Well,
That's what I'm trying to get.
Well, I'll make sure. I'm going to make sure that happens.
But that's all I want.
But not for a long time, please.
No. But that's all I'm looking for. But, when I started hosting these meetings and I invited the insurance companies in there and I invited the NTSB, it grew into something more. Because then the NTSB said, hey, look, in 2009, we're going to have this, and this was in 2008. In 2009, we're going to have a air medical public meeting on safety, and we want you to testify. And I said, okay. Well, back then, flight safety said, no, we don't do that. We don't testify at the NTSB. And I said, okay, I'm taking my vacation, but I'm going to go testify. And they said, well, you could lose your job over it. And I said, I need to go testify. So I went to Washington to testify for that. At the same time, the insurance companies called me and they were thrilled with the meeting that we just had with the NTSB. And they learned so much about training on the helicopter side that they didn't know, that they said, we want you to have an annual meeting for the insurance underwriters. And I said, okay, and they didn't worry about the lawyer anymore. So, but I went and I testified at the NTSB hearing. Bruce Webb, who is currently a safety person with Airbus, formerly Eurocopter, also testified with me. And there were a lot of people testifying, but we testified on simulators. And both of us got in hot water for testifying, but we both testified on simulators and the importance of it and how this could have changed the safety world back then and how it can change it for the future. Well, it took a while, but in 2013, the NTSB came out with a safety alert saying that helicopter pilots should train in simulators. It's SAA 031. They announced it at Heli Expo that year. And Robert Sumwalt and some of the other NTSB people said, this is for Terry Palmer. That we finally got this done.
That's a long time, though. 2005, kind of the conversations start. And then 2013, I mean, it's a long time to keep pushing and keep that momentum. And I can guess, just like any, government agency, the bureaucracy of it all was probably mind-numbing at times of, talk to this person and then talk to that person and fill out this form and do this and then do 5 jumping jacks and then we'll contact you in a year and then do this. Like, that would be the hard part to navigate. So really, kudos.
I showed up at the NTSB offices quarterly.
Yeah, you got it.
And just say, I'm here to give you an update on what's happening in the industry and what sector's doing what and what you need to look at when it comes to training.
Being the squeaky wheel.
Yes, I was the squeaky wheel.
So go back to when I cut you off earlier. You were just talking about how flight safety was concerned of making the simulator without the Eurocopter support, essentially. And so then you had ended up reaching out to Metro?
I called Metro Aviation and I talked to their president, Mike Stanbury. I knew he was a proponent of helicopter simulators. And I said, look, this is the situation. Flight safety doesn't want to do it without the data. They can't do it without the data. And are you willing to help? It would be a matter of having a helicopter available, equipping it with the equipment needed for the engineers to gather the data. And it's going to take a while and it's going to cost some money. And he said, I'm totally on board. So I went back to flight safety and I said, well, Metro will do it. And Metro ended up providing an aircraft to do the EC-135, and it took over 400 flight hours.
Wow.
In almost 5 years. And then we did the 145, and that only took 3 years.
Only.
But we had to do the data backwards. And one of the things that I found out was when an aircraft manufacturer builds the aircraft and they provide data, the data is not necessarily exactly the same as what they need for the simulator. So when the engineers are doing this, they have to consider if there's going to be a simulator and make sure that data is available, because otherwise you have to do it backwards and reverse engineer it. So that was some of the challenges. Right now, all the aircraft manufacturers, when they build an aircraft or design an aircraft, they think about the simulator side. So they now have that data available if it's needed. And the simulators have grown phenomenally. And the technology, okay, just like we're doing a podcast now, that technology wasn't around back then, okay?
No.
The technology has changed so much in the simulators that now you don't need a big level D $20 million simulator anymore. You can do a whole lot with an FTD. And a flight training device is normally, it's normally not on motion, although there's a few of them that are. It's normally not on motion, but with the visual system, and this is where the technology comes in, the visual systems are so phenomenal, you don't know you're not on motion. So the training capabilities of a flight training device now are absolutely phenomenal. And most of the operators that would come and say, okay, I'll train in a simulator because my insurance company is now telling me I have to. I'll train in a simulator, but I need to make sure I'm getting the training credit required by the FAA to do this. So this is a sore point I have with the industry at the moment, because the operators are all looking to check that box. The FAA wants all these tasks done, and we can do most of them in an FTD. Not all of them, but most of them, usually between 80 to 90% of them, okay? We can do in an FTD. The point is, it shouldn't be about checking the box. There is so much safety training that can happen in a simulator that the operators should also think about it as, this is the training I need to prevent an accident, not just the training to check a box. And there's a big difference there. And if they think about it that way, if they get 80% training credit in an FTD or 85%, they're going to have to do a local area orientation flight. They're going to have to do other flights anyway that can make up the little bit of difference by doing that. But it's not about checking a box. It's about making sure that everything is safe. Because if you make a mistake in a sim, you're going to survive.
Yep.
And that's the big difference. And learning that muscle memory to do things the right way when you find yourself in an emergency, and I really think that makes a difference. And I talked to various people that trained in sims, and I have another story for you. So while we were when I left flight safety and I went to Metro Aviation to help them build a training center to put some of these simulators in. And flight safety agreed to go with me. I went to run the training center and to build it. And they moved into the training center to make it a flight safety center as well. When I'm doing this, I'm thinking, I want this to be for air medical. I want this to be for law enforcement. I want them to understand this. Well, air medical was starting to come through, and a lot due to the insurance companies. But the law enforcement side wasn't coming in. And I started looking at that and saying, why isn't the law enforcement coming in? Well, some of them are self-insured, because they belong to a municipality. And others just didn't quite understand it. But what Metro Aviation did on the other side was they were a 145 completion center. So they were putting the interior in a lot of these law enforcement aircraft. So at one point, a law enforcement team came in to pick up their aircraft. When they came in, the aircraft wasn't ready to leave. And they were there early, and they got there at 6:00 in the morning, and they're all excited. They're going to fly their aircraft from Shreveport, Louisiana up to Boston. Mm-hmm. And the aircraft wasn't ready. And they were bugging the mechanics and, is it ready? Is it ready? When are we going to be done? So they called me up and they said, Terry, can you take these guys over to the training center and keep them busy for a little while so we can finish this aircraft? So I said, sure. So I brought them over, gave them a tour. And I said, have you ever been in a simulator? And they said, no, and we'll never get the budget for it. I said, well, I happen to have a free hour right now. Let's get in the simulator and try some things out. So we got in the simulator and I gave them inadvertent IMC and they crashed. And I gave it to them again and they crashed. And this happened 4 times. They didn't learn what to do, but they learned what their capabilities were at the time.
Sure.
Then they left and they said, wow, that's really something. We can really use this. I wish we could train in this. And they left. And they went back and their aircraft was done at 4:30 in the afternoon. And these guys elected, now they've been there since 6:00 in the morning. They decided that they were going to fly all the way home that night. So they left in the aircraft and everybody was a little bit edgy, The next day I got a phone call at home and it was one of the pilots. And he said, my wife wanted me to call you and say thank you. And I said, why is that? He said, well, we got almost home. We got as far as New York and we hit some weather. And normally we would have pushed through because we were tired and we wanted to get home. But we remembered that we couldn't do it in the sim. So we declared an emergency and we landed.
Wow. Man, talk about serendipity.
So they called me to tell me that little bit of training made a difference for them. Now they're allowing me to tell this story. In fact, the FAA has published it somewhere, but this was Massachusetts State Police who signed a training contract and trains in a sim every year now.
That's crazy. I mean,
because they learned something.
To me, it seems almost like a little bit of a no-brainer, right? We have all this technology. Helicopters are expensive to operate, and there's only so much that you can do in a helicopter. Now, there's some pretty cool systems. I podcasted recently with your friend Tyson. He's creating that. He has that cool device with the TA systems where they're, can do the view limiting and that's great training and obviously I think will save lives and help get people used to flying in that environment. But being able to go into a simulator and do the full simulation of flying into clouds, doing a full procedure, to a successful and safe landing. I mean, to me, it's really a no-brainer in training.
Thank you to our sponsor, Instrom Helicopter Corporation. Instrom Helicopter Corporation welcomes the new 480B Elite to its fleet, fully loaded with all the top-of-the-line features, including Garmin G500H, electric air conditioning, Genesis 3-axis autopilot, exclusive paint and interior, and more. 2025 delivery dates are available, but opportunities are limited. Secure your spot at instromhelicopter.com.
But they need both, okay? So in a simulator, there's so much you can do in a simulator. But what Tyson's equipment, what AT Systems equipment does that's different is it gives you that full motion, forward motion feeling. Mm-hmm. And there's a big difference. There's no simulator that can equal what that device gives.
Do the spatial disorientation.
So you need both, Yep. And there's cost-effective ways of doing simulators. You don't have to go for this huge level D. Flight safety won't like that, but you don't have to go for this full level D. You can get in a flight training device, usually at or just about at the operating cost of the aircraft. Okay. But the thing is, anytime, day or night, in any kind of weather, you can get in a sim. And I encouraged people to purchase FTDs and share it with other operators. Like we did at Metro Aviation, bring the competitors in, let them use it too. If we make the industry safer, everybody makes.
Yeah, everybody wins in that situation. Earlier, you were talking about how you still think the industry is maybe just checking boxes on certain things. How do we, as an industry, as a community, how do we change that?
Well, the FAA is not going to change it. Okay. So it's up to the operator. It's up to people to realize what the safety is. And the reason I'm still doing this and I haven't said, oh, I'm retired, I'm not going to do it anymore. We have all these new people in the industry now, and they don't know what we went through to get to this point and what we need to do to understand that in the simulator, it's about safety. And we haven't always had them, and it's not been good. And if we go backwards and you don't use a simulator, the whole industry safety record is going to go backwards. I mean, I truly, truly believe that. We've got to be able to teach that safety. And now that the aircraft there's so much technology in the aircraft now. It'd be very easy to get distracted with all the screens and all the digital equipment. It's very easy to get distracted. Learn how to use all that equipment in the simulator. And it used to be when the NTSB would say, we're putting new equipment on board your aircraft. When did you learn how to use that equipment? If you had an old aircraft and they suddenly put new equipment on board, when did you learn how to use it? In flight?
Yeah.
And it was a distraction. And there's documented accidents due to the fact that people got distracted trying to play with the equipment. And they didn't do well, So with a simulator, with an FTD, even with, an AATD, which is, the lowest level of sim that you can look at. I mean, you can learn where are the bells and whistles, what's the switchology, where are the circuit breakers, how to change pages on even on the Garmin, how to change pages on the Garmin.
Yeah.
There is nobody out there except some engineer at Garmin that knows what every page does.
Yeah. Well, especially on the older Garmins too, when you're having to do the knobs and all that. I mean, that was an art form in itself. Now, have you kind of seen this new the new sim on the block, so to speak, where companies are now using the virtual reality goggles?
Virtual reality simulators are definitely in the future. They're here now, but I mean, there's going to be a lot more of that in the future. Right now, dealing with the FAA, okay, in order to get certified at the higher level, and again, we're talking about training credit. The higher level of the sim, the more training credit you get. So it's a matter of educating the customer that they don't need to check the box for training credit. They can get a lot out of that. And I think that's going to be very helpful. Also, with the virtual reality simulators, there's more visual space that you can see. You can see the long line, that kind of thing. And I think that's very important because my new focus now, I don't know if you realize that I'm the chair of the Training Industry Advisory Council. I have to remember what we call it now at VAI. I'm the chair of the training group. And one of our focuses this year is to talk about mission-specific training. It's not just learning the aircraft. It's not just proficiency in the aircraft, but you have to be able to do the mission. When you go to a training facility, most of the time, you're learning the aircraft. You're not learning your mission. And, we have so many missions in the helicopter industry. There's no normal helicopter operation, that I think it's very important that we spend some time on the missions.
100%. I mean, being able to immerse yourself in what you're going to be doing would be so helpful. And I have to say, when I did the that virtual reality simulator a couple times, once at VAI and once in Europe, you can really see how they could set it up for mission specific scenarios, whether it's law enforcement, air medical. I thought that was really cool. And I was really impressed. Now, that being said, I don't have anything to compare it to. I never flew a twin, never flew a 135 or anything like that. So I never actually went to flight safety or Metro. A lot of my colleagues and friends, something that they did yearly and for their initial. And so I've actually never been in a Metro style simulator. So I don't have anything to compare it to. The only other simulation that I've been through is, Air Evac had like a Frasca set up. And I think it was more like an FTD, limited motion with kind of the big wraparound screen situation. And then they had these smaller simulators in the field that we would practice our inadvertent IMC procedure with, really more like procedural training. Extremely helpful, actually. All simulators that was awesome. So I've never been in like a level D or a real live simulator like that. So I can't compare it. But when I did the VR, it felt very real to me. It felt like I was almost flying a helicopter.
The VR is definitely in the future. And all of the simulator companies are looking at doing something with VR right now. So the one that you flew was probably a Loft. And then there's all these simulator companies are coming out with VR. TrueSim just announced one, and that's a Textron company. And Flight Safety, by the way, bought Frasca. I don't know if you knew that. Flight Safety bought Frasca so that they would have the full line of simulation for FTDs as well. And they're working on one. And Entrol over in Spain is doing a phenomenal job with their FTDs, and they're adding, mixed reality type stuff. And then there's Reiser out of Germany. They're also doing this. And some of these sims, by the way, are up at Copter Safety in Finland. I don't know if you knew that. Other than, Flight Safety and CAE have the training centers in the United States and Europe. Copter Safety has one up in Finland. Everybody just kind of shares the customers, basically.
Here's a fun Frasca fact. What's the home airport for Frasca?
Frasca is in Champaign, Illinois. Have you been there?
No, but do you know the airport that they use in their simulation?
Yes.
It's Newport, Oregon.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's Newport, Oregon. And how I realized that is I've been in 2 Frasca simulators, and each time I'm like, God dang, we're in Newport. And I know that because growing up, we had a family cabin. In fact, I just tried to buy that family cabin back, but that's a different story for a different podcast. But yeah, it's in Newport, Oregon. So like when I went to Air Evac and I was doing the Frasca training there, it was all out of Newport, Oregon, which was kind of funny. So just kind of like a little hometown airport for me.
Yeah, I didn't know that they did that.
Yeah, OMP. And someone told me a reason why it was chosen. I forget why, but Frasca chose that to be like that primary airport for their simulator. So I always thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, I think that Loft Dynamics was the simulator. In fact, I've had Fabio on the podcast before. He's the CEO. That's a pretty cool story. That's just a smart guy that was playing around with things and ended up building a simulator from it, which was pretty cool.
Absolutely.
And I just see so much practical application. And I agree, like what you're saying with, simulator in conjunction with training tools like what Tyson's doing, can really enhance the safety of the industry. And for me, my experience was I'm a VFR pilot through and throughout. I don't fly in clouds. As a helicopter guy, at least, I have an instrument rating, and that means nothing. Honestly, I got it because the flight school told me I had to get it if I wanted to get hired in future jobs. And then all my jobs were VFR. And, I never really practiced or prepared for IIMC. It wasn't until I started flying air medical that Air Evac at the time was really pushing hard at understanding inadvertent entry in IMC. And they were doing things with the aircraft like, glass cockpit, 2-axis autopilot, which were great tools to help with inadvertent. But then, man, they were pushing it so hard. I mean, our initial training was like 80% dominated by inadvertent entry to IMC. And they did it both in the Frasca and they did it in the aircraft as well. And then quarterly, you had to do it. And then it was encouraged to go and take your flight crew out once a hitch and go do a full, inadvertent IMC scenario. So for me, that muscle memory, not even being a VFR pilot, going through that simulator, going through the practice in the aircraft. Luckily, I never flew into the clouds, but I feel like I would have been equipped. I feel like it would have got my heart beating for sure, but I think I would have dealt with it and had a positive outcome. And I feel like that would be, I don't know if you know the percentages. I don't. And I don't want to put you on the spot because we didn't discuss statistics getting into this. But, how many helicopter accidents has there been where a perfectly good helicopter flew into the clouds and ended up either on the side of a hill or with spatial disorientation and lawn darts to the ground? So many, so avoidable, in my opinion, through good training specific to simulator.
And then also learning to make the right decisions. So there's always the human factor component, learning how to make the right decisions when you're in that situation. What am I going to do?
Well, 100%. And for me, that's what I loved about the simulators was you did it. You actually did the whole flow and you built this muscle memory. And so you build a procedure. And so if it happens in real life, I would think that hopefully that muscle memory would kick in, that training would kick in and, help save you in a dicey and scary situation. So clearly I would call you a bit of a trailblazer, specific to the training space, the simulator space. What are you most proud of that you've accomplished in your 30 plus years of being in this industry with a focus of safety and training?
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned aeromedical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140 plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completion Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
Getting people into a simulator. I truly believe that because when I started air medical, the only people that were going into simulators were flying Sikorsky's, and the rest of them weren't doing it on the air medical side. And getting them into a simulator has changed the safety record of the air medical community. And I'm trying to get the others into that area right now. I was thrilled to hear that some of the tour operators bought FTDs and they're using them. And law enforcement is getting there, but it's a little bit harder. And they're not answering to the FAA, but it's international. And one of the things, building the training industry advisory council up for VAI, it used to be the training committee and then the training working group. And now it's the industry advisory council and it's international. We have people from Australia. We have got people from Europe and they're all talking simulation and mission specific training. And the mission specific training takes into consideration what they're doing in the simulator. And then what are they actually doing for search and rescue, for firefighting, for utility work, all of these things that require special skills. And you get a company, like SRT, I think I introduced you to them. SRT does that kind of thing. There's several companies that teach that specific stuff. And that's the kind of thing that needs to marry with the simulator training. And that's why some of the simulator companies like Loft and, some of these others are putting in the hoist. And there's Blue Drop that has the hoist.
Yeah, I've seen that. That's cool.
All of this is to build into that mission specific training that I think is now the next step that we're going to go with. But I'm just proud of the fact that the safety has improved. It's not anywhere where it needs to be yet, but it has improved. And if we just keep looking, we can find the answers, and technology is going to help.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I have no doubt that if you've been pushing simulation and these companies in, the number of lives that you've probably helped saved has to be in the hundreds, if not even more. And so, kudos to you. That definitely must feel good. But yeah, there's always more to do. Right now, what's like your biggest to do in regards to making this industry even safer?
Right now, I'm writing for several of the magazines, including Vertical Magazine, and getting this information out. In fact, I have a new article coming out on CFIT in Vertical. But what I'm trying to do is get this information out and find out what are the pain points. That's the one thing I bring up every time we have a meeting. We have a monthly meeting for our Industry Advisory Council, and I bring that up. What are the pain points that you have? What are your challenges when it comes to training? What are your challenges when it comes to safety? Let's see if we can fix it. Let's see what the answers are. And the insurance companies are now constantly checking to see what it is are we doing? What is it we need to do? And the insurance companies are staying educated on what's going on.
Now, this article with CFIT, we'll finish off with that. Give us a little tease on what we can expect from that article and kind of what went into creating that.
It's kind of interesting. 20 years ago, in actually 2006, we printed printed my first article that I ever wrote, and it was called CFIT Recipe for Disaster. And I went back and I looked at it, and I contacted Oliver and I said, you know what? I said, these things are still happening, or they're starting to happen more often again. So I want to take that article and rework it for modern aircraft, modern technology, and say there's still a solution. There's a recipe to prevent CFIT accidents. So I rewrote that article for today's aircraft, today's pilot, and it's going to be in an upcoming issue.
Oh, I love that. In fact, you guys, if you're listening to this podcast, you can also find that linked here in the bio to that actual story, and vice versa. If people just stumble across the story on Vertical Daily or however you consume Vertical, you can click the link and listen to this podcast, which is pretty cool. So what are some of the recipes for CFIT that, in your opinion, that are, because, CFIT is, a leading cause of not just helicopter accidents, but also, small airplane accidents. What are some of those recipes?
First of all, it's making the right decisions. And second, it's having that training backup to know what to do when you find yourself in a situation. CFIT is usually due to decreased visibility, poor weather, inadvertent IMC, or it's due to distraction. And distraction now with all the new technology is a big factor.
Yeah, totally.
A huge factor. And then, there were times when air medical operations, everybody on board, when GPS first came out, okay, the aircraft may or may not have a GPS, but every crew member on board had one on their phone or a portable one. And everybody's trying to decide what to do, where to go. And, that's the kind of thing that you can't do. And you've got to have that sterile cockpit procedure. When you're in a critical situation, when you're close to the ground, which a helicopter normally is, when you're close to the ground, when for takeoff, for landing, or anytime you're not in a cruise, there needs to be a sterile cockpit, only talking about what needs to be talked about for that flight. And those are the kinds of things that I talk about in the article.
Oh, that's really cool. I can't wait to catch up on that. So important. CFIT to me is so avoidable. And of course, making those good decisions and hopefully just not getting yourself into that scenario, but also knowing that things can happen and things can happen really fast. I've seen weather change really within just minutes. And so I am cognizant of that. I'm cognizant that there's operators that operate in areas that have very polar weather, not polar as like cold, but polar as in like, 1 minute it's nice and clear, the next it's, completely socked in. So I think you can be a Louisiana, Texas, even sometimes when I flew. So you can be a great pilot that has great decision making and still end up in the soup inadvertently. And, I think the biggest thing is, being trained and ready for that. What I was talking to your friend about, Tyson, is that there just isn't enough of an emphasis in ab initio training, in my opinion. So take away like being an air medical operator, or a pilot, take away being a law enforcement pilot, go back to the very beginning in flight school, and we just don't have any type of emphasis, in my opinion, on spatial disorientation, inadvertent entry into IMC. If you're part of a 141 curriculum, it's like something you talk about, but breeze through it, and you move on. You're a VFR helicopter pilot. Don't fly in the clouds. IFR, I follow roads. It's funny, right? It's kind of a funny, and there's some truth to that with helicopters, but it's really actually part of the problem. It's like we just have this mindset in the industry that, we're helicopters. We don't have to worry about flying in the clouds. And well, someday you might. And unfortunately, a lot of accidents, and some very high profile accidents, have all been perfectly operated helicopters that, either lost control in the clouds or slammed into the side of a hill or whatnot. So I think it starts in the beginning. I think that flight schools need to do a better job with ab initio flight training and putting more emphasis.
Absolutely.
Like, how many auto rotations have I done? I've done thousands of auto rotations. Not even a small percent have I done inadvertent entry in IMC, right? It's just like, if I've done 10,000 autos, which I probably have, I taught autos for a long time, I've probably done maybe 50 training exercises for inadvertent.
So, and your chances for getting into the clouds are going to be a lot greater than losing an engine.
A lot higher, right? So it's just so funny. So I hope that there's a training mindset that can shift. So maybe if you're not already talking about that at VAI, maybe that's something to talk about as well.
Absolutely.
Flight schools, they got to step up their game. A lot of good flight schools, by the way, but I think it's just kind of been this thing that's been neglected. The other thing that's neglected, in my opinion, is kind of certifying airworthiness. This is completely different from what we're talking about. But, as a flight school, they breeze over like how maintenance is tracked and what does that actually mean, and actually proving that a helicopter is airworthy. How do you go to the maintenance records and look things up? And so some of my personal pushes have been, you got to do better at confirming airworthiness, and we need to do a lot better at pushing ab initio training and this idea of inadvertent entry into IMC. And maybe they are. Look, I've been out of the training environment for a long time. I haven't been to flight school for many years. So if I'm speaking in vain or in the past, let me know.
You're not. It's absolutely current. And, like there's been several accidents lately that corrosion's been a major factor. It's not just maintenance that should look for corrosion. It's the pilot doing the pre-flight that should look for corrosion.
Of course.
And that's the kind of thing that should be taught in ab initio training.
Yeah, fully understanding and making sure that your aircraft's airworthy. However, corrosion in your case worked out for that first airplane, and made your landings a lot better.
Exactly. But I'll never forget it.
I can't believe it. We're bumping up against our time here. Man, Trailblazer. That's tenacious Trailblazer. That's those are the words that come to mind after having this conversation with you. I truly believe our industry, and not just through this conversation, we were lucky enough to talk on the phone, and then speaking to Oliver as well. I think that the industry has a debt to you. I think you've truly made a huge impact on the safety. And I think we really just scratched the surface today. So if you're ever wanting to come back on and talk about safety, I would always love to have you on. To our listeners, you guys, we got to do better, right? We're all part of this. And we need more Terrys. We need more people that are willing to step up. I've talked about this before, but safety can sometimes be a little bit of a stigma. You picture the meme of the safety vest and whatever. But man, safety is so important. People die. People legitimately die in helicopters. I sit here and talk on this helicopter podcast all the time, and we talk about how great helicopters are, because they are. But man, bad things can happen in helicopters, and they do. and I've lost a lot of friends. And, so now I'm going to use this platform to talk to people that really have lived safety in and out. So Terry, thank you so much. MHM Publishing, thank you for giving me a voice. Thank you for providing a great platform for articles that can really help the industry. I can't wait to check out Terry's upcoming article on CFIT. And what a great idea, coming back and relooking and revising. Hey, 20 years later, what's changed? Well, oh my gosh, what hasn't changed, right? So what a really cool concept to come back and relook. So I'm so excited to read that, and to our listeners, wouldn't do this show if you guys wouldn't listen. So I appreciate that. Terry, thanks again for coming on, and to our listeners, we'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you.
Please stay tuned for a final word from our sponsors.
Thank you to our sponsor, Vertical Aviation International. This March, you need to be at Verticon, the largest vertical aviation trade show and conference in the world. With over 15,000 attendees and all the major OEMs and suppliers, it's the place to be. Register today and save. Early bird prices end January 16th. Go to verticon.org. Thank you to our sponsor, Instrom Helicopter Corporation. Instrom Helicopter Corporation welcomes the new 480B Elite to its fleet. Fully loaded with all the top-of-the-line features, including Garmin G500H, electric air conditioning, Genesis 3-axis autopilot, exclusive paint and interior, and more. 2025 delivery dates are available, but opportunities are limited. Secure your spot at instromhelicopter.com. Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned aeromedical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140-plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completion Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.